you know, I don't know what to do with it. I'm having to change the city, the names.
Yes, that's what I was going to tell you.
Okay, we are now going live on Facebook. Woo! Yay!
Yeah.
We have been doing this for almost a full week, and this has been fun, fun. I am so excited, and I'm going to get you guys started on the discussion. Then I'm going to go check to make sure we actually went live. So we don't have our technical person with us tonight. It's Friday night, and she's spending the evening with her husband and 2 children. So Amy, we miss you horribly. So we're going to get started. First, we're going to talk about fiction tonight. We have 30 minutes to talk about fiction, and that's a lot to talk about in 30 minutes. I first want James, you're going to be up first. James is the publisher, the founder, the creator of RockHill Publishing. And James, introduce yourself and then introduce the 2 guests we have with you.
Okay, so I am James Hill, as you heard, publisher, owner, creator of RockHill Publishing. And to my right is Athena Paris. She's my editor-in-chief, and right arm, it's the right arm of RockHill Publishing. She does a whole lot of work, and she keeps this thing rolling. She keeps it on track. And then we have Zach Baccaris, who is our fiction writer, historical fiction. And he's one of our 9 or so, 7, 9, something like that, writers. And he published his first book with us this year. So he's one of a newbie. Everybody in RockHill is pretty much a newbie. And if I slide to the right, let's see. Can you see his book cover? Well, he can open his book cover.
He has it. Zach, hold up your book cover and show everybody. There, yay. It is a beautiful cover, and it does look great. So good. David's already joined us, of course. He's saying hi to everyone.
Hello, David.
Hi, David.
David's so loyal and faithful. He's either been live with us or he's been on every single night this week. So David, thank you. And I can't wait for another opportunity to have David read from his book, because that was just amazing last night. If you missed last night when we had people, the authors, reading live from their book, you need to go to YouTube, and we'll put the link in the comments below. So go to YouTube, listen to last night or any night. We've had some great nights talking with the different authors from RockHill Publishing, each night focusing kind of on a different genre. So we're doing things a little bit differently tonight, and we're going to talk fiction. So Athena, you were giving us some great information on fiction and the different topics or different genres. Actually, I guess that there used to be only 5 genres, you said. So today we have, it's almost like you write a book, you create a genre for it. But explain what you were telling us earlier.
Well, in the olden days, let's say, the basic genres of literature were fiction, nonfiction, drama, poetry, and folk tale. And so fiction is obviously made up stories. Nonfiction was obviously manuals or how-tos, any of those books. Drama was something like Hamlet, Macbeth, all of those fall under drama. Poetry, of course, you had the romantic poets, the war poets, and so on. They could be divided into sections of what they actually wrote about. And then there was folktale, which mostly had to do with teaching stories, teaching lessons. It was about lessons. So the mythology was involved in that. But of course, as everything evolves, we have come to the stage where we have so many, and now we have sci-fi, we have fantasy, we have so many genres and subgenres. You can't even begin to dissect all of those, because as you said, every time somebody writes something, they basically creating one of the subgenres that are now available.
So, James, which genres do you write in?
I write in adult urban fiction. I write crime stories about the mob, about gangs, about different ideas, different types of crimes. I write in science fiction, and most people know what science fiction is. I write somewhat of future and dystopian type fiction when I write science fiction. And
that's different. That's different now, isn't it? I mean, we didn't always have dystopian or cyberpunk or some of the newer ones that are still fiction.
Right. When I started writing fiction, when I wrote my first book, Pegasus, A Journey to New Eden, I don't really think they had the subcategory of dystopian. A dystopian is a society that is basically evil. The entire society is set up to bring down the individual and to control the individual. Now we have 1984, which is probably the birth of dystopian fiction. And it's how the government, and to be a dystopian, you have to have like a government overlord, so to speak. And then you have your hero who is going to somehow break that control and break out of that type of control. And that became part of fiction. Like I said, with the book 1984, 451 Fahrenheit is another one that talked about a dystopian world. And so my science fiction follow those types of stories, but it follows it in space and in a technological way.
Wow. Zach, what about you? What fiction do you write, and how did you get into that kind of fiction?
The fictions I write, my first novel I published was in historical fiction, but you know, I've done some other stuff. I've done a lot of alternative history, like what if the world happened, like a bit like Man in the High Castle, and everyone likes the Second World War, you know, what if the Nazis won and all that stuff, you know. But I like to sort of take things a little bit more off a less Eurocentric track, and more into sort of global issues. Like, you know, there's some very interesting stuff about what I think of some aspects of African history where you don't have things like Mansa Musa, the Malian Empire and stuff like that. What would have happened if certain things had changed at a certain time? And I'm a big fan. I've written 2 or 3 of these, but James doesn't know about them yet. They're black comedies, and I love you know, like comedy which is like accidental hero, or it's a little bit dark, it's a little bit twisted. And so in other words, you know, a guy, he's trying to do the right thing but ends up being this sort of, you know, total disaster in life. I don't know. I like those a lot because they're very real life. That's you know, fiction is about us making sense of the world. That's what we use it for. And I would write some sci-fi, except I write a lot of science fact. So I just had enough of that. I just can't do any more fiction and science fiction.
Makes sense.
You know, yeah. So you know, it's like that. So for me, I like a lot of the sort of the alt history and the comedy. The dark comedy is where I like.
And so where do you, when you're going to write, when you sit down to write, how do you know where you're going at that moment? Are you going to be going back into some of your global history and writing about something that you've read about before your time? Or are you going to write about current thing? I mean, where do you get your ideas, and where do you get all the information that you use in the fiction books?
Yeah, it's that's a great question, actually. I mean, a lot of stuff that I write, I tend to do in terms of certainly the American market, or certainly the Western European American market. I'm very much a case of I like to focus on things that are not the conventional. So it's something to do with Byzantine or the Islamic Empire or the Tang dynasty of China, or, as I said, the Malian Empire or Ethiopian stuff like that, you know, whatever it is. So to me, it's what would be very interesting. Like, for instance, if Russia won the Crimea War, how would the world be different? And I just don't know. And so I just write. But I think what you do is you start writing out ideas, and then you park them and you leave them for a few months, and then you carry on writing the next thing. Yeah.
So as a marketing person, this question is for all three of you. As a marketing person, I always think of who's going to buy your book. So when you sit down to write, do you ever think, who cares what I'm going to write? Who would be interested, or who would potentially one day buy this book once it's published? Do you ever think about that, Athena?
Well, yes, I do. And then I realize that every type of thing has the pros and cons, and everybody likes something or dislikes. So I know that if I like something, there is bound to be a group of people who are going to like the same thing as me, probably women more or less like me, of a certain age, who have done certain things, who have certain experiences in life. So that is how I figure who is going to like my books. And with everybody is basically like that. And then, of course, from that, that's the pebble of my books. But of course, I've got other ideas, and I go out, and so do they. Because everybody who reads romance, they don't just read romance, maybe they love fantasy as well. So therefore, we have overlapping rings that encompass a little bit of everything. So you know that this is your basic reader, but that reader also has other interests. So if you can fulfill many of those interests, you are really lucky writer. Otherwise, you're going to have your specific base, you know, of the people that read your book.
What about you, James?
Well, when I write, I kind of pick my stories according to the genre that I'm writing in. So can you just help me hold on a second. Okay. Yeah, that sounds better.
Okay. Okay.
So when I write, I go by the genre that I'm writing in, and I pick my stories and my ideas to fit that genre. So when I write science fiction is mostly read by men, and mostly younger people read science fiction. Now it's getting a little bit older up there in age, but mostly young people who are interested in adventure and things like that are the target audience. And because I write from a technical point of view, I know that it's going to appeal to a certain level of education. You know, when I write the crime stories, that I know is going to appeal more to a younger audience, well, because I write urban, which I didn't even know I wrote urban stories before, but as I was told, you know, I write these urban crime fiction. I know it's going to appeal to a broader base of people, but they're going to be younger. They're going to be more inclined to live in the cities. Definitely a Black audience. So but I always write first off to tell a story that I would want to read. So that's the main thing. I always think, is this a story I would read? Or is this a story that will be interesting to me? And And that's sort of like the basis from which I start my story, because I come up with ideas and I'll say, but that's not really that interesting. I don't find it that interesting. And if I don't find that interesting, it's going to be hard for me to write a story that's going to be interesting. So I hear a lot of things. I see a lot of things. I pull my stories from a lot of different places, but then you have to separate out what you consider interesting. And it's only from my perspective. It might be something very interesting to somebody else, but if it doesn't interest me, I can't write the type of story that would interest somebody else.
But I think then you have to write for yourself first, and then, you know, I think if you're trying to write for an audience, that defeats the object, doesn't it? You're writing.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, you do have to write for yourself first, and that's what they always tell you. You know, write your own story, write to yourself, and then other people will like what you write. All right.
Okay. So Zach, where do you get ideas for your books?
Some of them are just like real life experiences. I've had some interesting experiences in my life so far. I hope to have a lot more going forward. You know, but it's, I think, very much like The Crescent and the Cross, for instance. Just another plug of the book, again, with my lovely cover. You know, it's all like, you know, there we go.
But that was historical fiction, so you can't actually say that you experienced that, right? You did the research.
No, but what I did, quite right. But what I did is I wanted to tell the story of, you know, I'm Greek. I'm by blood, I'm Greek, and I have strong ties to periods of history. You know, my family have done. I've known about it for years. So I wanted to tell the story of my people, you know, for want of a better term. But I didn't want it just to be a dry history book. So I had to create something that made sense. And so what I did is I created a love triangle. That was a personal experience that happened. And then you create the characters that are within the book, so there are, of the historical fiction, there's 4 or 5 characters that are fictional and the rest are real. And so what I've done is I've put those fictional characters in the book, and they are, but I had to make it fit the history. So by doing that, I wanted it to be so they were from the ages of 14 to 27. And okay, so how do I put this in? Where do I put oh, well, everyone, when they talk about the history of this period, they talk about this battle and that battle and this one. Well, they didn't fit my story. So I had to create something totally different that still existed. So I was like, how on earth am I going to get people to go to how am I going to have these characters meet each other at this point? And I had to create something very convoluted, but it had to make sense. And so that's sort of understanding your history. But the actual experience of what happened to Antonis or Nicola or Alexis, that came through from a valid life experiences, you know. So
for all 3 of you, when you're writing fiction, I know with historic fiction, I can see where there's got to be things that have to be completely accurate. But how on other types of fiction, Athena, how much do you have to pay attention to? Would this really have happened in this particular time, in this particular place with these people? How much do you have to think about that while you're writing?
I don't think too much about it because I think I have a lot of memories, and I watch people a lot. So I record what I see and what I have heard, and even movies that you watch, you actually think, oh, that line and that line would be interesting if you take those 2 storylines and actually mix them together and create something completely new. And that is what creative people do. It's the same as a painting. everybody can paint a portrait, but everybody's portrait will be different. So writing is exactly the same. We take all the same ideas, but we bring ourselves into that role, and therefore we create something unique because it's our voice. It's each writer's voice that brings that story across.
And James, what about you when you write your crime books or even the science fiction? What parts do you have to make sure that they're accurate, historically accurate, scientifically accurate, or just in general? How do you make sure that works?
Well, in the crime story, if you are bringing in actual events that happen, of course you need to make sure that those are accurate. You can't speak of something and be 10 years off. You know, you can't say that this person was killed or this thing happened and be completely off because people will call you out on it. So when you're talking about crime stories and you want to bring in actual factual things that happen, oh yeah, you have to be accurate with that information. Now in science fiction, and this is the odd thing about science fiction, it all depends on the type of science fiction you're writing. There are certain rules and laws of physics that cannot be broken. And you find that, and I find this very funny, because you find that not only in science fiction, but you find it in other writings where they will say something like, they hear the thunder, and then I saw the lightning flash. Well, that's completely wrong because you will always see the lightning before you hear the thunder, unless the lightning is striking you. So people do that even in any kind of fiction story. They'll get those facts wrong, and it makes me chuckle every time I read that.
But hold on, like James, couldn't you have like a wormhole right by the thunderclap that brought the sound through and it came quicker than the speed of light? I don't know, you never know.
No, not even in a wormhole will sound beat light.
So no matter how creative you get, you still have to be accurate in certain areas.
Yeah, there's still, in science fiction, there's still the laws of physics that must be adhered to. Now, you can bend those laws. You can have your wormhole where you're able to travel faster than the speed of light and things like that, but you better be able to explain why. Now, I also write fantasy, and the reason why I like fantasy, because you could throw all of that out the window and you can write whatever type of world you want to create. And it does not have to hold to any of the laws, because you throw in magic, you throw in mentalism, you throw in all kinds of things that just make things fit to what the story you're trying to tell. And that's the beauty of fantasy. In fantasy, anything is possible. In science fiction, everything is probable. And in actual fiction, there is a hardcore truth that you must adhere to. You know, you can't say that Hitler won the Second World War unless you write in an alternative history. So you're writing a regular history and you want to talk about the Second World War, Hitler has to lose and he has to die. It's just a fact.
Well, and so, and Zach's historic fiction goes way back before that. So Zach, how did you do the research? How much research was involved in making sure that the right people met at the right time?
Well, yeah. So what I did is I knew a lot of the Greek side of the history. What I didn't know was a lot of the Ottoman Empire side of things, which are very fascinating because you know, obviously everyone sort of has their blinkered vision or they always have their opinions and whatever. What was interesting was to see how meritocratic they were, how very it's not surprising they made it. It's a bit like sort of US Manifest Destiny of that sort of period of time. They expanded so quickly from nothing. So I had to do some research to understand who the characters were more than the history. So I create the story that brothers start, brothers grow, brothers split, brothers whatever, they meet the chick, blah, blah, blah. And you have that whole structure. And then I was like, okay, then I overlapped it with a timeline of what happened in those periods. And so you then like join the dots. Okay, well, this bit can work here, and this bit can work here, and this bit can work here. And so you do it that way. And then I then obviously wanted to find out about the characters of the, so what was Sultan Mehmet like? Mehmet was 21 years old when he conquered arguably the greatest city at the time historically had ever been. And he was 21. That's crazy. You know, this guy was, and he was also in real life, he was actually made Sultan and then pulled away, and he was usurped, and they brought back his father. And so there was a palace coup, and so he was always an outsider. He was also, supposedly, no one can say it, but his mother was actually a slave girl who was a Greek slave girl, not Turkish even. But there's obviously these stories because there's interesting parts to it. But the fact is, he was an outsider. And so it was this outsider that came along and created this great moment. And he's called, you know, Mehmet the Conqueror. They define themselves, Turkey defines themselves by this moment of history. And so it's a great thing. So you've got to understand that character, that person. Who was that person? And that's actually more the research you do rather than, oh, how many soldiers were at this battle? How many, you know, because that doesn't tell you the person. It doesn't tell you what drove them forward. And what drove George Washington to cross the river, you know, when they were losing, you know.
And that's where fiction comes in, because their history would tell you possibly the number of people that were in the battle, but history is not going to tell why George Washington did certain things or why some of your characters.
Yes, that's very true. But there are also some very clear like pointers. If you look between the lines, if you read between the lines, you know, you'll look at Washington. I don't know. I'm trying to think. Washington might not be a good example, but he basically had a lot of failure in his life. Washington, he had a lot of failure. Churchill's a prime example. Winston Churchill failed so many times, and at that one moment in 1940, he was just the right man for the job. And
I was just going to say that that's the part of fiction that you can write. And there's moments in time in people's lives, those are the facts that you got to stick to. The things behind the person, you can fictionalize that, because a lot of people don't know the actual man behind the story. And you can discern certain things about the person because of the way they acted or the way they did things. So you could say, oh, well, George Washington was very insecure, or George Washington was a meek person, or something like that. And you can attribute some things to them fictionally because of the fact that that's the kind of information that's really not recorded by history. They record the deeds that they've done and when they did them. They don't always record what was behind the person, or they really can't record sometimes what the person actually was like. If it goes further back in time.
Well, that's why you as the author get to do that. You get to choose that, why they did certain things, right?
Right. And you research them, and then you research them, and then you add that to their story.
Okay, well, let me get Athena. So Athena, what are your thoughts on this? Because you write romance and other fiction. So what are your thoughts on what would be historical and had to be accurate versus what would be fiction?
Well, with fiction, it's a strange thing because it has to be, it's moments of life condensed into its adventurous parts. That's what fiction actually is. So you take everything that's real, you transform it into a different story, and it's, for example, in the mornings, we know what everybody does. We get up, we wash ourselves, we get dressed. But in fiction, you don't mention those things. You just say, she was on her way to work. Why? Because we all know what happens in the morning.
Do we wash ourselves every morning? I didn't know that.
Brush our teeth, wash ourselves, brush our hair.
I want to get a female look at this whole fiction thing, okay?
So that is where fiction comes. You want to cut out the mundane. That's what you do in fiction. You cut out the mundane and you only bring the interesting bits of everybody's life. That's why a read is interesting and adventurous and heartfelt and all of that. Why? Because you take out the little things that take up time, because we all have boring days.
So let me, so David said that historical fiction takes time and research, and eventually he wants to have the time to write in that genre. And then John, John Ford is watching, and he said, we base it on a true story. And that's very true. We're out of time to discuss that, but that would have made a great comment. We had talked about like, okay, so it's based on a true story, but you don't know that all the men bathe when they get up in the morning. So that would be a fiction. That could be fiction. So listen, so I'm going to take one final, Athena, any final comment from you?
No, this was fun. I enjoyed discussing, and once you start, you can't stop, because the ideas just keep on coming, and there's always something to add, and everybody's point of view is always valid and interesting.
And so, I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about the point of view even more, because that's really important, I think, for a fiction book. Zach, any last word from you?
Yeah, I actually had two emails from people that follow me. One from Charles Davidson. He asked me, what's the most important sense to write about? Sight, sound, hearing, touch, feel, smell, which is an interesting one, because I think often people miss out the smell sense, which biologically is the strongest. And then the second one is from Fiona C. And she asked about plot or dialogue. Which do you think is more important?
Yep, and those were made great discussion questions. Yeah. Wow, we could have gone on the hour-long ones, maybe, James, for next time. So, James, what's your any final word from you? And you're muted, so you need to unmute.
Okay, can I unmute?
You're on mute now.
You are still muted.
Unmute.
Okay.
With me and Athena sitting here, sometimes muting and unmuting is bad. Okay, well, my thoughts are fiction is such a wide range category and genre that we could spend days discussing fiction. Yeah. And those elements of fiction, like you say, plot versus dialogue, what the point of view that you want to talk about, all these types of things. And they're not only tied to fiction, they also tied to fantasy. So when you start thinking of fiction, you have fantasies in there, you have romances in fiction, you have all these other genres that all fit underneath the heading fiction. Yes, so this was a huge topic to cover in just 30 minutes, which I knew it would be.
Who picked this topic? It was fun. It was a lot of fun. We could have talked a lot longer, and it's great to have, remember, leave them wanting more. So anybody wants to know more about fiction, we could do a whole recording of that sometimes, James.
But if you had a wormhole, we could have done 5 hours of it. It would have been 25 minutes.
Okay, guys, it was great. Thank you. And we'll be back again tomorrow night. Tomorrow night we'll be here at 7 o'clock Eastern for another RockHill Publishing live on Facebook. So we'll see you tomorrow night.